Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. In this show, I will dissect China-related stories from around the world and discuss with guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the China puzzle. Join us in real time by sending us a comment or question via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN application, email me at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. We live stream every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Beijing time, so do get in touch and your comments will appear on the screen. First, I'd like to react to a viewer's letter we received after last week's discussion. We talked about how China's second International Import Expo was featured in some foreign media, such as Reuters and the Washington Post. The letter, by an overseas Chinese living in Malaysia, reads, "I must agree with you that for whatever they're worth, the Western media are obviously not free from prejudice or bias, nor are they free from the propensity to deliberately present untruthful or selective information. In fact, the dissemination of fake or biased news, as viewed from colored lenses, are often intentional, calculated at misleading readers or to disseminate a certain narrative bias. Often this is done with malicious intention to further an overarching aim, that is, to demonize and to destabilize China. For it is patently clear that the West in general, and the US in particular, views China's emergence with convolution or a complex feeling of fear, jealousy and suspicion. The social media platforms has become just a battleground. In this regards, no doubt you and your colleagues in CGTN are doing a great job in equalizing and compensating for pro-West propaganda and proselytization." Now, the letter is much longer, but we only have time to read this short snippet. A big thank you to this reader for taking the time to share these thoughts with us. And I would say maybe not everybody in the West or in the United States are hostile against China, but I do understand the complex feelings that China's rise has triggered in the minds of many around the world. The truth is, China will continue to rise and will try to be a responsible member of the international community while safeguarding its independence and deciding for itself what political and economic systems to adopt or reject. There is no international consensus or law which stipulates that countries must adopt certain systems, and 70 years of reality has underwritten the legitimacy of China's path. So those in the West who wish to maintain their economic and political advantages over China should understand the Chinese system and its people for their own interests. Now let's get started on today's topic, Hong Kong. The very latest is that, and I'm very sad to hear that, an old man died in hospital after being hit by a brick hurled by rioters. This is the first confirmed civilian death resulting from the unrest, bringing the week of escalated violence to a tragic end. The past Monday was one of the worst days of violence since protests erupted in June. Protesters paralyzed roads and forced the closure of more than 32 subway stations throughout the day. More than 260 people were arrested on Monday, according to police. One particularly appalling scene happened when rioters set an ordinary resident on fire in the Ma Shan area. The man was seen standing in front of the group expressing an opposing view. A bottle of flammable liquid was then emptied on him before someone quickly set him alight. The gang fled the scene immediately, leaving him in flames. The man suffered multiple burns and was rushed to the hospital. Now he was reported to be in critical condition. Also on the same day, footage circulated online showing a group of black-clad rioters harassing a young woman who tried to walk away, and they stopped her repeatedly before assaulting her with sticks and spraying her with fire extinguishers. Violence was not only inflicted on Chinese people, but also a foreigner. A Japanese man was injured in an assault by rioters in a major shopping district on the Kowloon Peninsula. The man was shooting a video of what was happening on the street before being beaten and bloodied. The Japanese foreign minister confirmed a Japanese national was attacked, although exactly why he was beaten up was still being investigated. I understand he was mistaken as someone who came from the Chinese mainland. Against escalating violence, the Hong Kong police also responded more resolutely. On Monday morning, a policeman shot at a rioter while on duty. The man was hospitalized and reportedly not in a life-threatening situation. So yet another dark day in 5 months of unrest. And immediately, Hong Kong was back in the international media spotlight. To me, the most astonishing thing was how young and supposedly righteous youth could set an unarmed fellow human being on fire. However, mainstream international media focused almost exclusively on the police shooting. Some did mention the burning, but in such a matter-of-fact way, as if it was just another machine being set ablaze. For instance, The Guardian published an article on Monday, the day when the incident happened. The title reads, "Hong Kong protests, man shot by police, and burns victim in critical condition." A weird sentence, to say the least. The passive use of language omits conveniently the people who carry out the atrocity of burning someone alive. Immediately after the headline, the article says, police fire at unarmed student and a middle-aged man set on fire in a day of violent clashes. So the student was unarmed, but what about the middle-aged man? Was he armed? No. Why does the journalist not include that fact too? Also, what makes a student different from a middle-aged man in the eyes of the law? The biggest problem is the article puts the police doing their job before and on a parallel with civilians trying to kill a fellow civilian. Is that how people treat innocent people in the UK or elsewhere around the world? If this were to happen in the UK or elsewhere, would the journalist have the guts to write it this way? Would the paper have the guts to print it this way and sell it for money? Well, some would argue that the police were using excessive force while doing their job. Well, at times of escalated violence, the police have the right and obligation, I would say, to use stepped-up force to protect not just themselves, but also the wider public. But if you look at the detail of that video, there is another story going on there. From the original unedited video, you can see the policeman pointing the gun at the black-clad man while trying to subdue another rioter, but the man continues to approach him, even attempting to snap the gun from the policeman. That's when the shot was fired. But if you look at the video published by The Guardian, strangely, the moment the rioter tries to grab the gun from the policeman's hand was edited out. So that was the original freeze, okay? And then the video continues. What happened afterwards? Let's take a look at it. Take a look at that again. So there the video stops. You don't see the action that the protester, the rioter, was trying to grab the gun from the policeman's hand before the policeman shot him. Why edit out such a critical moment that is vital to understanding the events which unfolded? The doctored vision certainly seems to make the protester look more innocent, maybe, and the police appear more brutal in his actions. What motivated The Guardian to make this editorial choice? Was it perhaps to gloss over the human burning incident while trying their best to justify the legitimacy of the protest movement long after it has turned violent? What do you think of it? Please tell me about it. Now, my second case in point is the CNN coverage on that day. I was watching some of the CNN coverage of the Hong Kong protest. It was evident that police brutality was dominating the headlines, not the rioters setting an innocent man on fire. And I decided to look a little deeper into the coverage, and it seems this wasn't just my imagination. CNN published a total of 8 stories about Hong Kong on Monday, the 11th of November. 2 of the stories refer to the man set on fire, while 6 of these stories detail the 21-year-old student being shot. Is the former not as cruel, not as callous as the latter? Is the former not premeditated and not as severe as a policeman trying to contain a volatile situation? At the very least, isn't equal, balanced coverage of both sides of the incident, of the protest, the right way to tell the Hong Kong story? Even when the story of the man being shot on fire is reported, they focused, the CNN, I mean, focused on the actions of the victim. I picked one of the stories, and the headline reads, "Man set alight hours after Hong Kong protesters shot by police as clashes erupt citywide." The video shows an unidentified and unarmed man shouting expletives, as protesters before saying, "You are all not Chinese." However, if you watch the video, you can see that the rioters are being equally provocative. It almost seems as if the article was trying to justify this violent act. I would say whatever language was being exchanged, this man was not being physical, not even yelling at anyone, and he was one against several. Clearly, he was not threatening anybody's safety. To imply that he was set on fire for using strong and unacceptable language, in my eyes, is trying to justify a crime that can be accepted in no civilized society. Finally, I turn my attention to the Independent as I was preparing for my show on Monday, and I bumped into this story, and I think it is worth mentioning. The Independent published an article on Monday with a headline which says, "Hong Kong protests, man set on fire in argument over national identity on day of clashes." Now, this article detailed rather accurately how the man was set on fire, quotes information from different sources and the internet, saying, multiple videos posted online of the incident showed an older man dressed in a green T-shirt arguing with a group of younger men and women. So the burning incident did happen, but according to the article, who would know who committed it? These people were dressed in black, but maybe is it just a coincidence that they are dressed in the same color as the protesters and the rioters? The article stops short of identifying the potential perpetrators, but it did not miss the opportunity to attack a Chinese media outlet for using the term rioters to describe those who apparently riot. The passage reads, "The Global Times, a Chinese state-run English-language newspaper, quoted police as saying the incident took place on Ma On Shan district. It described the young people shown in the video as rioters, a loaded term used broadly across Chinese state media to describe pro-democracy protesters." The article questions the use of the term rioters, calling it a loaded term. I would like to know, what else would you call a group of violent men and women who douse a man in petrol and set him on fire? By continuing to call them pro-democracy protesters, do you mean what they did was still in the name of democracy? Does the journalist imply that as long as it is for the sake of democracy, you can do anything? The simple fact that the many in the international media continue to find excuse for such violence has, to me, emboldened many of these young men and women, pushing them off moral and legal boundaries. Well, that's all the headlines for this show. We're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back to discuss with my guests on what I have talked about. So send us your comments or questions to all the addresses and the email that I mentioned, especially the point with alex@cgtn.com. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to this edition of Headline Buster, our weekly segment to dissect international media coverage on a certain topic. And this week our topic was the violence which happened in Hong Kong last Monday in particular. And my guests are Ms. Wei Nanzhi, Deputy Director of U.S. Society and Culture Division of the Institute of American Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Mr. Wang Cong, a reporter with the Chinese newspaper Global Times. So welcome to Headline Buster. Thank you very much for being with us. So I would like to start with your reactions and thoughts of what happened in Hong Kong over the last week, the kind of violence that we saw, especially on Monday. And, you know, I detailed quite a few incidents, what happened on Monday. What are your thoughts and reactions, Ms. Wei?
Thank you. I think the Hong Kong protesters always claim that they protested for the rule of law of Hong Kong. But what they have done is just to break the rule of law. It's violence and even terrorism. I think it's very terrible. I even read a story that the daughter, a teenage daughter of a police officer, was harassed by other adults.
Mm.
It's obviously terrible. How can such a child shoulder responsibility no matter what action their parents have done? She cannot and should not show such kind of responsibility. I think it's unfair.
Yeah, sometimes it is beyond people's imagination or understanding, you know, how this kind of thing can continue to happen and be tolerated. Yeah. So your thoughts? I mean, you were there. You were in Hong Kong a couple of times already, right? You just came back last week.
I spent probably about a month this summer in Hong Kong, and you know, unfortunately I have to say this kind of reporting is expected. It's very unfortunate to say that, but this is how they report on everything that is related to China. You know, in terms of the writing, but the tone of the reporting, it's pretty clear that they still hold all these, you know, sympathies for these rioters. Somehow that what they're doing is, you know, what they describe as pro-democracy, but in their actions and in their demands, there's nothing, you know, nothing democratic about it. And it is especially, you know, very appalling and very angry for me, because last night I was talking to a spouse of a senior police officer in Hong Kong, because I have to interview for a story, and then she showed me some screenshot of these officers. I mean, there's nothing in those stories about the level of violence leveled against these police officers and their families. You know, there's nothing mentioned in there.
Yeah.
Where's the fair and balanced reporting?
I think there is a certain understanding or underlying, you know, premise that policemen are not human beings. Mm-hmm. You know, policemen are somehow machines. And because they represent the state power or public power, which can be abused, so the policeman must be held to the strictest standard, you know. But let's not forget, after 5 months of violence, of provocation, I think these policemen are under great distress. Okay, let's take a look at a message that we received from the YouTube platform by this person named Joshua Pinella. No, we are definitely not being told the whole story. Who's even funding the equipment supplies for the rioters we saw at the universities? But fortunately, people have been reporting independently, so we've gotten to see the truth. So he was definitely talking about many in the international media. Obviously, this is someone from the outside world. And yeah, here's a very important question. You know, the other day we were talking about the violence that happened on the campus of Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the police said the campus practically turned into a factory for producing petrol bombs, and there were pictures of students busy preparing petrol bombs one after another. And of course there are other gears and, you know, equipment and even you know, improvised weapons. Weapons that are, and there have also been saying, I don't know how true it is, but I've heard many different sources saying these rioters were paid to go on the street, and there is a prize for different things that they do. For instance, if they participate, they get how much. If they are arrested, they get more. If they kill someone, if they kill police, they will get even more. So a lot of people, simply by taking part in the protest, I understand, made actually quite a handsome income. So there was even talk of a young older brother thinking of bringing his younger brother to the so-called front line because of the economic benefits that he could part. How true are such allegations? What do we know about this?
We did some investigation, and we did receive some credible sources. However, you know, we don't want to come out and, you know, directly report it, which we often, you know,
when we
bring it up to our editors, say we need more, we need more. We were very frustrated, and among our reporters, we say if it was a Western report, it's out there already. But we, you know, at the level of caution, we exercise at the global time, because we're very closely watched, and we have to be very accurate. But we have, I mean, I personally, we talked to some sources, and they're credible. These are credible allegations. We haven't put on, you know, like a specific number and where the money come from and how it was dealt, but we know for sure, for fact, that these are happening. You know, people like Joshua, they can, they can see
They
for
see
themselves.
what- yeah.
They do a little bit digging, and then they know the whole
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, and sometimes these stories, as I was talking about, the independent story, for instance, it's just not coherent. On the one hand, they detailed an atrocity. On the other hand, they question the use of rioter. I said, these people are clearly, doing unbelievable rioting things, and yet, so it's not coherent. But anyway, let's take a look at this one by a person by the name of Chong Yan Lon. I'm living in Hong Kong. Actually, not only Western media have these biased and misleading coverage, the Hong Kong local newspaper and media also have the very misleading coverage, which are not based on the fact. Yeah, Ms. Wei, your comments, your understanding of the kind of stories that have come out of Hong Kong, about Hong Kong, not just by Western media, but also media from Hong Kong.
We should not be fooled by the fake news and biased media. Maybe it is very difficult for us to find an unbiased media, because every media has its stance for left wing, some
has
right
its perspective.
wing. Yeah. But the news should be balanced, and we should have civil discourses. But as to the violence, they did not, no discussion, no communication. They think they should only persist such kind of violence. Otherwise, what should I do? We can just view an interview by a German journalist with a Hong Kong violence girl. Their discussion presents that what I should do, what I can do is persist, then violence. It's not for the democracy. It's not for the rule of law. It's only for violence. But the future of Hong Kong people, who can present? Who to protect the Hong Kong children, the Hong Kong old people? We know there is an old man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who died.
Died because of the violence.
Because, yeah.
Everybody's life should be matter. Not only the so-called protesters' life matter. Everybody.
It's really sad. I mean, what happened to this guy, and he was said to be the first civilian death resulting from the 5 men. By the way,
right, yeah.
which is already an incredible record. I hate to use the word, because if you look at what happened in Chile, for instance, if you look at what happened in many other places, within a week, within a few days, you already have thousands of people being arrested. You already have a lot of casualties.
20 dead in Chile.
Yeah, in Chile, and yet in Hong Kong, after 5 months, it is fortunate and unfortunate at the same time. But what happened? Because this 70-ish year-old man, he was actually just an ordinary citizen. But I saw the video. He was very angry, right, with what the rioters were doing, digging up the roads and destroying the city. So these citizens, these normal residents, took up arms kind of to protect, to resist, the disruption of the protesters.
Yeah, I think this whole incident proves a couple of things. First, that they are not a democratic movement, as many Western media report. Because why they attack this person? Because he holds a different view from them. If somebody is holding a different view from me, and then I'll attack them, then that's not freedom from speech.
No.
That's not democracy.
Yeah.
And then they attacked him, and then now he's dead. That's not a peaceful protest. That's riot. That's violence. So
I don't know.
Just proved a couple of things. And also I want to mention that the Hong Kong newspaper thing, it's even worse than some of this Western media. Apple Daily. Because, the owner of Apple Daily, Jamie Lai, with Global Times, we have called him a traitor. This is a person who have, going out to the U.S. and asking for the, interference of the U.S. government in the Hong Kong affairs. And he's from Hong Kong, and he make a lot of money off of that. Because why? This kind of biased reporting has some, audience in some radical elements of Hong Kong and, beyond.
But he's not just there for the money.
That's what I'm saying. It's not for the money. Where is the responsibility? But, that's in Hong Kong, and, they operate that way. It's sometimes frustrating, but it is. It's even worse. Apple Daily, I mean, they just black and white. It's just, they can't tell.
Yeah, it's really frustrating that actually my understanding is that a lot of the local media are actually very anti-China themselves, even the governmental radio station. So I understand there was an open letter signed by 150 journalists calling for the decommissioning of the Hong Kong TV and radio because of the kind of China hatred stuff that they were churning out. But that, again, is a very long-term problem. Let's take a look at this message we got by this person by the name of C.L. Lee. Can someone tell me how media would describe people called ISIS when the pilot who was captured was set on fire? Rioters or terrorists? Yeah, exactly. So basically he meant, you know, what the ISIS were doing, or what this group of young men and women were doing to this innocent man was not very different from what the ISIS was doing, setting fire to this
you
pilot
know, the
who was
most
captured.
iconic comparison is what happened to my colleague at the Global Times when he was, you know, like tied up at the airport. I mean, you only saw those in ISIS videos where they behead people. I mean, fortunately, there's nothing happened in this case, but the picture, the image, what else you can call them, you know, if they trying to threaten reporters, attack people who's different, what's the difference?
When I think about that, I'm speechless, because on the one hand, I know there are many people who are not violent, you know, who are on the streets, you probably saw them, but then there are this small, I don't know how big it is, the group of people who are committing things like this, and the next second they probably turn very normal. You know, they fled and they appear on the other side of the street, you know, walking and, you know, just like anybody else. But that particular moment, it's like they turn little devils.
I mean, but it's the job of the reporter to differentiate from this. For example, when I was there, if this event, this rally is approved, and it was, you know, peaceful, it's very easy to tell it's peaceful or violent. You know, if it's peaceful, then we will describe as it is, peaceful protest. However, what follows after those peaceful protests is violence, and then we will call them, you know, riot.
Yeah.
And then this independent report, it said the Global Times, you know, used a riot, a loaded word, describing the actual word, because we use that because the actions are riot.
Yeah, there are no other words to describe it. I don't know. If I'm calling it loaded, that's an opinion. That's not reporting, right?
Yeah.
So they should not fix that. Okay, the comment by Charles Ma, they killed a 70-year-old man with a brick. That speaks volumes. How much more will it take until the people of Hong Kong really stand up and say enough is enough, briefly?
I think right now it's still tough because the tension. There's still a lot of people, at least when I was there, that believe that their lives are not affected because, you know, this happens in certain parts of the city. However, as these things continue to escalate and spread up the city, as we have seen over the last couple of days, I am sure that a lot of people can stand up and speak about it, because we have already seen that we have expats in Hong Kong, you know, trying to push the barricades out of the roads, and who are not afraid to speak.
Many of them cannot agree with what, you know, is being said there.
A lot of them, but they don't want to do anything because they just want to, you know, because they think their lives haven't been impacted.
All right, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to Wei Nanzhi from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and many thanks to Wang Cong from the Global Times. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of the Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point with me, Liu Xin. I'll see you next week.